Well, hello everybody. Welcome to Maestro Moments. About 2.5 weeks ago, we were going to play you one of the great romantic symphonies of all time. And I just wanted to spend a few moments talking about it, especially for those people who would have never heard it before. It's one of my favourite works. In fact, I think it was the first Mahler symphony I ever conducted. It's an enormous piece. It lasts the whole evening, about an hour and a half, a little more perhaps. And to me, it says so much about Mahler's ability to write for the orchestra and ability to communicate with his public. On one level, it's just great, full of great tunes. Mahler's Third Symphony, you see, came quite swiftly after the second, which has always been a great popular favourite. But to me, this Third Symphony is much greater. I enjoy the Second Symphony enormously, and I enjoy conducting it. But the third is closer to my heart in a way. I think the musical material is more imaginative, more potent, and he uses it more cleverly than in the Second Symphony, which of course has always been more popular. But I think the Third Symphony is something we should do again. And if we fail to do it for you now, this May, let's hope that, next year, the year after, we can programme it again and you will all look forward to it. It's a great celebration. It has darkness in it, it has drama, something more solemn, and it has joy. It describes at the beginning inanimate nature. It's written for a huge orchestra, enormous orchestra, with 8 horns. And they all start, just the horns, like this. Solemn music, noble music, epic, written on a big scale, the sound of 8 horns all playing in unison together. To me, it's a song. It's not a march, not yet. It's a song of the high hills, these mountains that surrounded Mahler every summer when he went away to write music in his summer vacation. It has the most wonderful colours in it. One feels that the size of the orchestra is there to give him colours, to give him variety, not just to make a lot of noise. Particularly in the first movement, which lasts about half an hour, 35 minutes, depending on how fast or slow, there's a great part for the trombone. The trombone is like a singing rock, a singing mountain even, and everybody joins in with him to make a great climax. And eventually this first movement develops into a march. And he called this first movement, The Summer Marches In, the end of spring and the beginning of summer. He nearly called this symphony Pan, you know. And there's one moment when he says it's meant to represent Pan snoring, with all the low instruments doing these glissandos down to their lowest notes, sliding around in a great snore. It's a wonderful piece and such fun to play. One of the things that is so incredibly achieving about the symphony is after this first movement, and Mahler says you should have a good break after it, something's very difficult to do nowadays. He imagined a real break. Perhaps the conductor goes off stage, a good 5 minutes, the audience can relax, talk about what they've heard. But this doesn't work nowadays, really. I sometimes sit down and bring on the chorus or something, bring on the mezzo-soprano, to give a sense of space, that we don't go on too quickly. But this first movement of such power is balanced by a last movement that is also long and intense in a very different way. In between come 4 other movements, 6 movements in all, and the variety of these movements is astonishing. After such a gargantuan first movement, the second movement is elegant. It's really a minuet. The oboe has a great part to play. It's orchestrated with such exquisite detail, the strings in many parts, the whole feeling sensuous, full of colour, full of embroidery, charming but distant. The third movement is more is more about the animals of the forest, he said. The second movement he thought might be what the flowers tell me. The third movement, what the animals in the forest tell me. It's rather naive, like a woodcut. It's rather unexpected and charming, even funny, humorous. And into this world comes man. And he wanted this to be a great effect in the orchestra. And it's impossible to miss it, because the charm and naivety of the music is suddenly interrupted by something much more challenging and dramatic, and the tempo seems to fight and gets faster and wilder. And it calms down eventually, because he has something really, really special up his sleeve. And that is a childhood memory. A childhood memory of the sound of the post horn. Now he says this must be played on a flugelhorn, which, as many of you know, particularly those of you who love jazz, the flugelhorn is a more mellow trumpet. It's richer, has a wider bore, and the sound it makes is altogether different and more nostalgic. And out of all the screaming of the orchestra, of the animals as they panic with the arrival of man, comes this lovely, lovely tune. It dies away into the distance, comes more than once. Now this flugelhorn is not on stage, and this produces in the performance a really wonderful atmosphere, with everybody else, the strings and the orchestra, occasional woodwind, occasional harps, playing really quietly. And there in the distance, you can hear this song being sung. And it's always difficult to know where to put the player to make the most beautiful effect. It doesn't want to sound as if he's in a box room somewhere, in a cupboard. It wants to sound like on the open air. Mahler would remember, you see, these different horn calls, meaning different things, meaning different communications. The sound of the post horn bringing the mail from town to village to town would have its own tune, and he'd remember it coming across the lanes on the coach with the guy announcing his arrival. There were many ways that horns were important, in hunting, for instance. So this sound may be idealised, it may be a little nostalgic, a little sentimental, sweet, but it's so beautiful and so longing. And it reminded Mahler of those days in his youth, when he was brought up in a little town right next door to a military barracks with its own band. That sound, of course, is very much part of his music, often, isn't it? You feel he's remembering the crude marching band of the military life. But this moment here is the centre of the symphony. Here we are in the middle of the third movement. And there's lots of excitement after it, as if the world of the post horn is banished. The next movement, the fourth movement, is altogether different. It's what the night tells me, and it's inspired by Nietzsche's famous work, Also sprach Zarathustra, immortalised by Strauss later, and also by Delius in his great Mass of Life. And that's a work we must do sometime in Manchester. This brings the mezzo-soprano to the fore, and it's a very beautiful nocturne, very sustained for the orchestra, and altogether a different mood. Not too long, brilliantly judged. Into that quiet mood comes the sound of young boys, cherubs, putti, the Italians would call them on their lovely Renaissance pictures, these little cheeky chaps. And these kids sing just boom, bim, bam, in the most childish and charming way. Bim, bam, bim, bam, bim, bam. And into that world sings the Ladies' Chorus, one of the lovely folk songs that he did so beautifully, Mahler. So it's full of light, it's full of joy, and it's always hard with these kids, getting them to concentrate, getting them to sing accurately, to realise where they are, to be fun and yet disciplined. But then I thought often when it doesn't work and they're all over the place, well, it would have been like that in heaven, wouldn't it? The putti wouldn't be so well behaved. So it's a lovely, charming, lively scherzo, a joke. And it dies away most magnificently at the end, magically, as if it all disappears. It's like a vision of heaven. And into that world comes the first of Mahler's great slow movements. And the cellos. And this lovely inspired music, after having played for an hour, at least more, an hour and 10 minutes probably, the orchestra has to summon their most beautiful sound, their most tender feeling. What love tells me Mahler somehow thought about it. The love of God, how life comes from nature and it goes to God's love, the span of this great symphony. He didn't really write these titles, onto the score. He thought about it first, but he was so nervous, as so many composers were at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th, to be called program music writers. That was Richard Strauss. He did that better than anybody. And everybody else wanted to be thought of as absolute composers, writing music of grand scheme, but not necessarily describing objects or designs or narratives. So the symphony has this great, beautiful slow movement, which is not without pain and darkness, not without panic, I would say. But at the end, the beauty and confidence of his musical idea rises to the most glorious climax. So this is a piece that we should play. We shouldn't forget. The orchestra should learn it. I remember the first time I ever conducted the Hallé in this work was very, very long time ago, 30 years ago, in the old Free Trade Hall. And we've done it, I think, twice together in the Bridgewater. But I look forward to doing it again. It's a great, great work. And it is, above all, a popular work. A work that is designed to go to people's hearts, entertain them, and in the end there, move them. So thanks for listening. I hope you'll enjoy it. And we'll find time for some more maestro moments later.